Good morning. You can tell by the anticipation, everyone started to get quiet. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Development Services Forum here in Walnut Creek for the month of August. We have taken a slight break. We're back after a break we took in July. So thank you all for attending. Appreciate seeing some new faces, but also a lot of familiar faces and some staff among others. We do have, as I always have up, the agenda for today, and though it looks light, we actually have a meaty spotlight, if you will, or a focal point, which is the topic for today, which again, turning afterthoughts into forethoughts, looking ahead, planning ahead for service infrastructure. Before we jump in, though, I wanted to highlight a couple of points. Number one on the agenda is that we have, in direct response to interest from this group that has been expressed in having PG&E come out and attend, we have them confirmed for next month. So we will be having PG&E in the room in September 20th. So those of you who are looking ahead, planning ahead, September 20th is a Wednesday, 7:30 here at the third floor conference room at City Hall. Also, I would be remiss if I did not mention a couple of changes we've had here at the City of Walnut Creek, and I'll start and be self-centered to begin. I'm serving the city in a new capacity as the planning manager. I had been working as economic development manager and now working as planning manager here for the city. But in my stead, I believe, working on details, but Fran Robustelli is going to be spearheading economic development matters for the city in the interim basis. And also helping her will be Jessica Cole, who many of you are familiar with as our innovation lead here at the city. And as far as other changes we've had or others to welcome on board, I want to highlight who we have here in the room. Thank you, Councilmember Luella Haskew is here. She is a fixture once a quarter at least, if not more frequently, and usually Mayor Carlston joins her, though not this morning. Thank you for being here. Did you have anything to No. No,
except I'm not new.
She is, well, we appreciate your attendance all the same. Thank you. But we do have a new face in the crowd, and that's we have a new city manager here at the City of Walnut Creek. I want to highlight and recognize Dan Buckshire, who joined us and started August 7th, a little over a week or so ago. I don't know if, Dan, if you'd care to come up and say hi or introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's my 8th day on the job, and it's been a great 8 days so far, so I think I made the right move to come here to Walnut Creek. You know, some of you I've had the opportunity to meet. For those of you that haven't, I look forward to doing so. It's one of my main goals here over the next few weeks and months is to get out and meet as many people as possible. I'm new to the area, so I need to learn about the city and the community and get to meet folks. So very happy to be here, and it's nice to see that this is a well-attended event. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan, and welcome. He comes to us from San Luis Obispo County, where he served as the county administrator there for a number of years. So thank you, welcome, and maybe we'll see you again at future forums. I wanted to, as I mentioned at the top, it's been a couple of months literally since we last met. We took a month off. We had a meeting probably 2 months ago, almost to the day. And I thought it might be helpful, I know we were all chatting ahead of time, but it might be helpful at each individual table to kind of acquaint ourselves, take 2 to 3 minutes now if we could, and just introduce yourself to your fellow table mates, and maybe mention a project or something you're looking forward to working on here in Walnut Creek. We do have a mix of both staff and developers and development community members. We have folks ranging in the hierarchy from director level to line planning level to developers all around. So, and we have other organizations present. So I'm going to pause for the next 2 to 3 minutes. Just say hi. I know we did earlier, but just introduce yourself so we know who's at the table, and we'll convene in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Thanks. right. I thank you for taking that moment to reacquaint yourselves. I'd like to kick off the meeting here with a couple of highlights for some work that actually was done, completed by Luella and her colleagues at the dais August 1st downstairs regarding some development impact fees. And I'd like to turn first to Margot Ernst. You've met her before. She's our housing program manager. She's here to talk about some of the housing fees. And then Rafat Ray is also here, city's traffic engineer, and he'll talk about the traffic impact fee and what council's action means for all of you. Margot.
Good morning. So this is just a quick update on the action that was taken by City Council on the fees. So on the left-hand side, it shows what our current impact and in lieu fees are for affordable housing on rental and ownership. So for the smaller projects, currently there's a tiered fee structure for 2 through 9 units, and it's slightly different between rental and ownership. So it's tiered, so it varies between well, on average between $2 and $9. 10 plus units for both rental and ownership, the fees are $15 per square foot, and that's for the aggregate total livable square footage. And beginning on January 1st, 2018, the tiered fee structure is going to go away, so it'll be the same fee for all project sizes. So any project that is 2 or more units will be $18 per square foot. And there will be an annual adjustment. We don't currently have an annual adjustment on the housing impact fee, so there will be implementing an annual adjustment that will begin on January 2019. It will be tied to the construction price index, and the new fees will apply only to projects who don't yet have an application that's deemed complete. So if you've submitted an application with the city and it's deemed complete by staff, then you would be subject to the current fee if that happens before January 1st, 2018. And then there are still some policy considerations that will be going through Planning Commission and City Council, and we are going to be moving forward with looking at additional incentives through the density bonus ordinance. So I'm going to hand it over to Rafat.
Good morning, everyone. Ethan asked me to be brief, so that's very difficult for me. So the story of TIF is very simple. It's going up 30%, but I want to tell you the background of this. The City Council took this very seriously, and there was a lot of balancing that took us to the 30% range. We haven't updated the TIF for about 9 years. And the TIF has historically been adjusted by the construction price index. However, the number of projects doubled. The TIF needs to have a nexus, so it depends on the projected cost of improvements over a 30-year period. It's a 30-year planning document. So when we did the analysis, we found out that the TIF could easily double. The $36.79 per trip is almost about, I would say about 50% lower than most traffic impact fee rates in neighboring cities. However, the City Council direction we hired an economic consultant and looked at the total number of fees, so there will not be an impact on development. So we're not collecting the recommended amount for the projects that we have to build, but there are other priorities for the communities, and that's where we came up with the 30%. And we recommended that we begin immediately, and the council took it to 2018, January 2018, and only for the applications that are deemed complete before January 1st, 2018, will be exempt from the increase. And that's about it. The calculation, like the 36.79, is equivalent to 1 afternoon peak hour trip, which is generally produced by a single family home. So the single family home rate is the TIF fee is $36.79, and it is less for multifamily, and it's much higher, because for example, a gas station pump generates a lot of PM peak hour trips. The fee is going to be higher, and it's calculated on a case-by-case basis depending on the land use. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Rafat and Margot, for those updates. Again, we try to be informative here at the forum, and we also try to start conversations. That said, I'd like to invite Jessica Cole up to introduce our next guest. And it's a staff member, but Jessica has a few things to say. So.
Okay, so those of you who are forum regulars may hearken back to a meeting that we had right around February when we did a journey map exercise collectively and then actually visited a number of your offices to follow up on that. And one of the things we heard going through the journey map of what it's like to go through a development application from start to finish is that there are certain things that come up towards the tail end of the process that end up being troublesome when they are surprises and you didn't know to anticipate them early on. Well, who best to talk to us about the surprises that come up late in the project that maybe we could do a better job of anticipating early on than Carlton Thompson, who is our senior civil engineer. And in particular, our goal with this presentation was to share both with you and with staff some of the moments where if we plan ahead, we might be able to save time, save money, and move all the projects forward more quickly. So with that, I will introduce Carlton to walk us through some tips on things that tend to be afterthoughts, but could potentially be forethoughts.
Let's see if I can get set up here. I have this in a, I'm going to try to do this off of the online version. Okay. And I've got a mic on so I can walk around. Can anybody hear me? Is that good? Yeah. Working? Okay. So, as Jessica said, one of the things that we have been trying to do is look at some of these items that come up when people are doing projects and they struggle towards the end with some things that really we could have maybe done a little bit better. Sometimes you don't have control over those things, and we get it. So you're going to see some photos, you're going to see some pieces of this presentation that you go, there was, maybe you had something to do with that, and you're like, there's no way we could fix that. That's okay. What I want you to know is that, and you're going to see some of my failures in here too. So we're going to share some experiences, and I'm just going to highlight some things that we see when we see projects as they get done, and we go, man, that would have been better, or maybe we've heard from the developer that maybe that was a struggle, or it took a lot of extra effort, or cost a lot of extra money. So this is a trash enclosure over by the creek, and I won't really tell you where it is. I've been trying to hide where some of these things are. But about 2 years ago, the solid waste authority staff came and they said, hey, we really need to talk to you guys about trash enclosure standards, because trash enclosures in the city of Walnut Creek, especially in the downtown, are a pain in the neck. And what they were trying to relay is that often they were undersized, and then they were also maybe not completely utilized, or they weren't designed properly enough for the trucks to be able to get to them, to make the pickups more efficient, and they were seeing a lot of misuse out of these things. So these pictures are fairly obvious, but this is the inside of that trash enclosure, and you can see that there's a whole lot of other bins on the outside, and we're right next to the creek here. And so, and in here, these things, these red things right there, those are the tallow bins for the restaurants. So these are things that really, and that one has its lid open, but this should all be inside, and that should be big enough to do that. And then I think Frank will tell you that trash enclosure, Frank Kong, the chief building official, will tell you that trash enclosure doesn't meet the fire code. It's made out of wood, and it's supposed to be non-combustible. So these are things that we see, and as we look at projects, as we try to get projects through the process, we'd like to get a better job of, and we'd like to do a better job of, mostly because it's a pain in the neck for the people who operate them, and it's a pain in the neck for people who use them, right? I imagine there's probably a pretty good reason why this doesn't get a lot of attention. It's back of house, nobody hardly ever goes over there, and it's probably a pain in the neck to fit everything in there and get it all out, so they just leave it where it's more convenient, right? So what are afterthoughts? And that's, some elements of the design, they're not fully addressed until late in the design process. We go, we can figure that out. We'll work it out later. But ultimately, they affect the operation of the project. All right. So what are we trying to avoid here? You'll see something later. We're in this together, but we miss stuff too. And we don't want to keep repeating the same mistakes. And I think that's what the solid waste staff was telling us was, hey, we keep seeing the same problems over and over. We keep running into the same things where the truck drivers have to get out and move stuff around, or they can't push the carts around like they need to. But we also see where when we get back into that corner, we're being asked for an exception to the standards, or exception to code. And we also are trying to avoid the undetermined impacts on the right-of-way, where you're lot line to lot line, and the only way to solve this thing is to put it in the street, or in the sidewalk area, or somewhere that's in the public right-of-way, or in an easement. And that can be difficult, if not impossible. All right, so goals. Share our experiences. Remember, we're all in this together. And at the end of the day, we all live with the results. If you come down and if you live and work and operate in downtown Walnut Creek, or in Walnut Creek in general, you're going to run into some of these things. All right, so here's what I'm going to cover. And I'm going to ask you to play a little I Spy game with me, because I'm going to put some photos up here, and I'm going to ask you, what do you see? And there's a picture up here, and I'll ask you in a minute what you see. But I'm going to cover trash enclosures, fire protection features, utility stuff, ramps, accessibility. I'm going to cover that from the public right-of-way perspective, and a little bit if going into the building. But really, you got to deal with the building code when it comes for that stuff. C3 basins, which is everybody's favorite topic. I won't harp on it too bad. And then parking and loading zones, and that one is pretty small as well. Anybody see what's wrong in that picture? Yeah, the sign, right? So that arrow goes that way, and this arrow goes that way. It happens. So yeah, I put that up there because we all do the best job we can when we put together plans, put together projects, and we send people out to do the work. They do the best job that they can, and we still end up with this. And this is easily correctable. You just order a new sign. But we see these things, and we go, wow, could we have done this a little bit better, right? And if somebody's a visitor to the community, what do they see, right? So, but we also think about the safety of stuff too, right? So, trash enclosures. The biggest thing here is show us that you plan for it, that it's something that you can, that it's going to work, that it's big enough, that it meets the number of tenants that you have. It's not just one little box where it's got one little trash enclosure. It only handles garbage. It doesn't handle all three waste streams. So how many of you know that by law you have to cover all three waste streams? Yeah, right? So you have to cover garbage, recycling, and green or the compost waste, right? That means that some of those bins can get a little bit smaller, gives some businesses some flexibility. But it also means that you have to be able to fit 3 bins streams worth of stuff in. And if you've got a multi-tenant facility, or your multifamily plus retail on the bottom, you have to count for those different streams. And often what we see is this sizing of the trash room and the trash enclosure, because it needs to be so big, eats up so much rentable square footage. It's the last thing anybody wants to deal with, and they really don't want to pay for it. We get it. And they're expensive if you have to build one outside. So, but there's something that we got to pay attention to. So here's an example. This one doesn't even have one, right? So one of the things you're also going to see is I color-coded these. Jessica and I were going through these yesterday, and she goes, you need to give them some idea of about what's important to see on the slide, whether these things are really bad or not. Because some things, there's something that's really good in it, and there's something that's maybe not so great in it. And so I color-coded them, so if it's red, it's just wrong. If it's yellow, it's got some okay stuff in it, and it could be better. And if it's green, there's something good in it, right? And some of these you'll see that they're all green. So this one here, this is a restaurant. It's got no trash enclosure. Now they're backed up against some public street, public right-of-way here, but this is a challenge for those businesses that have this and the owner that has this facility. How do you deal with this much garbage? And restaurants, by the way, generate the most amount of garbage of any waste stream that we looked at, period. And they generate it quickly. And I can tell you a little bit more about all of that later. All right, here's the one I showed you. The yellow, at least they have a trash enclosure. Right? All right, what do you see with this one? This is a new one. Yeah, they're probably not using it. There's a couple other things in there. Anybody got anything else? Access to it, right? So if you can see right there there's a little bit of a curb to that parking stall, and then there's a curb here, and that's the trash enclosure. So, and then there's this car. He's not even in a parking stall. He just pulled up. Right? So, and how does the garbage truck get to that and roll that bin out and get it back up in there, right? That's difficult. That's next to impossible. That driver's going to dump that thing, and he's going to drive off. And he's going to leave it for the building owner and the operations folks for whatever business that belongs to deal with. And guess what? That person isn't either maybe big enough or inclined enough to push that thing all the way back in there, right? And when it's heavy and it's full, they're going to cart it down off the curb and get it out of there so the guy can come by and pick it up maybe 2 and 3 times a week, right? So when we look at stuff, we want you guys to consider, and as you go through the projects, to consider this kind of action. And oh, by the way, this is blocked by a handicap stall. What if there's a car in there? Legit. You can't. I mean, how does the garbage truck get access to it? Hopefully, it comes really early in the morning, right? All right. What do we see with this one? I got a yellow and a green. I gave you a little arrow. If you can't read it from the back of the room, it says garbage only. Recycling bins are by the fence. So the bins for the recycling are across the aisleway against the fence of the property line. They're just sitting out there. I didn't put that picture in here. Because as soon as I did, you would know where it was. But the garbage enclosure is designed properly. It's underneath of a cover. It's got metal doors, and it's non-combustible construction. The truck can get in and out of it, right? The truck can pull up to it. It's got some good features to it. It was nicely done, just not big enough, right? So these are just some things that we notice, and we want to go, let's pay attention to that. So on to fire protection devices. This is something that we see impacts the right-of-way a bunch because through the initial planning phases, they don't get accounted for anywhere on the site. There's not enough room when you go lot line to lot line. And what people forget is that backflow preventer, the associated valves and elbows for the size of pipe for the fire line that goes into your building. And if it's over a couple of stories, it gets to be 8, 10 inches big around. That thing can get as big as 20 to 15 feet long and about 5 feet wide. And and all of a sudden you don't got enough room from your building and across the sidewalk for that. You're trying to stick it in the landscaping, and oh wait, that's in the right of way. We can't have that stuff underground out there because then it's in the way of the utilities and anything that the city might need to do. So figuring that stuff out early and at least allowing some room for it is something that really has to get looked at early on in the process. So what do we want you to pay attention to? Consider the access from the street for these things. They also have to get maintained. And landscaping features, if you stick too many trees around them, they're also kind of can be a problem, right? Access. This guy up here is what they call a fire department connection. Anybody know what that is? I cannot call it a standpipe. It's where the fire department will connect their hoses up to put pressure back into the system for inside the building to make the fire sprinklers continue to operate. And so these things stick out. You can see how that one's kind of sticking out past the sidewalk a little bit. Clearances and distances from the pedestrian pathway in the building is the other item here. And then incorporate the devices into the building where you can. There's some places where you can kind of tuck them in. You may see a little bit of that in here. When we get into permitting, everything about permitting is going to be, give me some more detail. Show me more what we're talking about here. So I'm going to move around in the room because it's driving me crazy that I have to stand in one spot. One of the things we've also found out is that the developer comes in and goes through the process with us through the entitlement phase. We get it all kind of worked out, and they go into the permits, they go to the fire department, and they go to the water district, and all of a sudden these things start to move around. And then for whatever reason, but then there's no room to put stuff back. And so communicate changes is that second item in there about when those things change. Let us know so we can figure out what the issues are. So we're not getting into construction, we're not getting to the very end, and all of a sudden we have this issue with an entitlement or a condition of approval that you can't meet. In other words, the amount of landscaping that's required, where it's required, or maybe there's public art or some other interference issue with that, right? And planning always wants to have things screened and painted pretty. And I know some of the utility districts have issues with painting of these devices, that they have some requirements for how they get done. And we always want them green or as hidden as possible, and they need to have access. Some of them need to be in easements, some of them don't. So there's a lot of little nuances that go along with this stuff that really you got to pay attention to. And the earlier you give yourself some room to deal with some of these changes, the earlier in the process, the easier it is to deal with it. You're going to hear me say that a couple more times. Okay. One of the things about fire protection devices, they are not optional. You have to put that stuff in. I mean, I've seen where, certain instances and certain uses through the building permit process, there's some alternate means and methods for some stuff, but for the most part, you've got to do this stuff in some way, especially in the commercial development, and even in the residential. There's residential fire sprinklers in single-family homes now. Fire department. So we learned this with the Broadway Plaza project, and I did not put that picture in here, Heather. But the backflow preventer for Broadway Plaza initially got installed for one of the buildings right in the front of one of their key buildings in the landscaping right up against the curb, because the fire department wanted access to that stuff, and they want to be able to see where it is. They want access. And it was the ugliest thing because it stuck up out of the ground like this tall. And so from walking down the street, you saw that, and then you saw the building. We went, this is ridiculous. We worked a solution with East Bay Mud for that. But you also have to pay attention when you got the landscaping, the C3 basins. So sometimes you can't tell that they're C3 basins. You can't put these things, that fire protection device, in the C3 basin. You got to give yourself some room. You're going to see one here where there's some fire protection stuff in a C3 basin, but it's not really inside. It's on the edge. And then here's something else that gets forgot. These things get maintained. And so once a year or so, they got to get drained down, sometimes by zone inside the building or by floor. And you got to have a place for that water to go. And it can't go in the storm drain, not directly. So you got to have at least enough landscaping area for that to pond up in, or you need to have some sort of connection to the sanitary sewer system, which they're going to want to know about, and they're going to want it locked out, and they need to be notified so that when that happens, the whole part, and Central Sand's in the room, so if you don't know, they're here, you can ask them specifically. You have to work those things out, and you have to work them into your plans. Okay. What do you see? Right? So we got two red pipes sticking up out of the ground. They're actually appropriately placed. Why is it yellow? There you go. The window. Right? It's right in front of that. This is this business's storefront window, and these two standpipes are sticking up in front of the window. What are you going to see? The merchandise or the standpipes? Right? So if you're trying to get pedestrian, we think about these things, believe it or not. We shop down here too. We do think about this stuff. In this case, this is a remodel, and there's probably an opportunity for the architect maybe to move that window around, but maybe they didn't see this on the site plan. And so then it got built, and it is what it is. It's probably a little. They went 3 feet all the way around that thing. That's not quite 3 feet. But I'm pretty sure that those standpipes were there, and so there was no requirement to really make them move them. But that window's an issue, and this little thing right here, I'll try to use this instead of, right there where that lock is a handle, and it comes off, and it goes back on top, flipped over, so that they can turn that valve. That's what they call a post indicator valve. It tells the fire department whether or not the sprinklers are running, whether there's flow through the sprinklers, and they can shut that piece off if they need to. And then the connection for the hoses are right next door to it. And then you can see out on the street the public fire hydrant. They're white here. Okay, so this one cracks me up every time I see it. So it's in the landscaping, kind of nice and hidden. Fire department actually doesn't have any issue with this because they can get access to it. These are those post indicator valves in the FDC. Somewhere there's probably a backflow preventer that's pretty large somewhere. This is in the right of way. It wasn't intended to be that way. So the project was all designed with it out. But when it got all the way through the process, there's a dedication of everything from the curb line. So everything this is on Locust. Everything from the curb line in was all public. Everything from the curb line back was initially not. And so this is back behind the curb line in the landscaping. But then they came back and dedicated it. And so this ends up in the right-of-way. And I always get, well, you don't want us to put it in the right-of-way, but that's in the right-of-way out there. You're right, it is. It wasn't designed that way, but by some action later, that's what happened. So apparently we accepted some of that risk, right? We might have not done it knowing really. So who pays for when this stuff has to get moved, changed? The utility has to come through there. We have to change the street. Who pays for moving that fire department connection? What happens if it breaks? Who pays for the damage? You know, that's the kind of stuff that we really do think about. It's really about the safety and the impacts to the public when we're telling you we have an issue with some of these things. In general, we want to hide them and tuck them away as much as you do. We want them to operate seamlessly with everything else. But we do think about who's responsible for this thing. And this is what bugs me about that one. This one's not bad. It's a little awkward because you have to walk past the driveway, which needed the ADA path. You've got the fire hydrant. Could the fire hydrant been moved, made it a little bit of smoother transition? Probably. Could that light pole been adjusted some way to get it a little easier around that pathway? Maybe. Is it 100% wrong? Nope. Just stuff like that. This is Broadway Plaza. It's 3 feet off, but it's in the middle of stuff. It's a pain in the neck. The fire district and I went around and around about where that was going to go. Because I was trying to get it so that it wasn't in front of those windows. At least now it's in front of the column. Right? But it still sticks out in the walkway. You're going to notice some of these things when you start walking around there. You're going to go, oh yeah, that's not right. All right. This is not bad. This is actually at the library. I'm pretty sure. This is maybe not the fire department connection, but it gives you a sense of how big some of these backflow preventers can get. That's actually a fairly small one. And then here is some of the irrigation valves and backflow preventers for the irrigation. The irrigation ones are fairly small. Okay. Anybody got any questions so far? I'm doing a lot of talking and I'm not getting a lot of interaction. All right. Utility features. This runs a whole gamut of stuff, but mostly we want to make sure, one of the things that we see often that gets messed up is that they don't always get shown on the drawings that the architect's working with. Not all the features are turned on. Not all the stuff got surveyed. It's not available to the MEP. He can't necessarily tell where some boxes are, or, where the civil can't see everything, because it didn't all get picked up. So that's kind of a big deal. And then utility rooms, it's just like trash enclosures, you got to give up rentable square foot to get that stuff in there. But if you've got residential above and you've got 50 units, you may need 50 separate electric meters or gas meters too. And PG&E has a green book that has a standard for how much space you need per meter and how that goes. And guess what? That can get quite large. You can combine some things, but if people are going to pay their own utilities, like in a condo project, you need to have room for that. And we see that gets kind of sideways as well. Now, a lot of times the developer will work that out inside the architecture, but sometimes it'll come outside a little bit. All right. I can't emphasize this piece enough. Apply early to the utility districts. When you have utilities, apply early. Very early. Get their requirements. Go talk to them. Talk to them at the counter. Show them your project, because the design requirements can drive a lot of things about your project. And PG&E can take as long as 42 weeks. It's almost a year just to get through their process. And that's if you turn stuff around, because they just have that much of a backlog. You're 15 to 18 weeks if you miss your construction schedule. You go back to the back of the queue with them. Just because how busy they are. And then when we get into fire season, they get even busier because they have to deal with all of the power pieces. They pull crews out of construction to go fix all those transmission lines and other things that get affected by a lot of the fires in California. So PG&E has a very big job. They got a lot of stuff going on, and on the backside, and when you get it all ready to get scheduled, if you get outside of their schedule, you'll go back to and it'll just add to the sequence. So getting in there early, getting it all coordinated, and getting it to us so that we can see that there's not other interference with the other utility pieces is important, and that it all fits. Right? Unlike San Francisco, we have your private utility pieces can't be in the right of way. We don't have that. We have a prohibition against that. You need to put your stuff, because you're not part and party of the USA piece as an individual developer or property owner. And so if you put your facilities inside the right-of-way, somebody has to be able to notify you to mark where those underground facilities are. And that's often what comes up with some of these things. They want to put an underground vault in. I've got one project where they want to put an underground vault in the flood zone. You can't do that either. They keep telling me, well, it's okay, it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay because it affects the residents of that building if there's flooding. And that's the one thing that the flood insurance program is meant to do, is protect the residential component of the community in a disaster or in a flooding disaster. So if you've got a residential component and you're trying to put the transformer underground in a flood zone, I'm going to tell you no. And so is PG&E, really. They're actually required to do that. So these are some things that you want to pay attention to. I will highlight right here that East Bay Mud has some rules about who can construct. I think Contra Costa Water does too. And there's also some recent changes to crossings of utilities, crossing of water lines for sure, that you can't cross over with storm or sanitary. You have to go under them. That's a relatively recent change, and I think that's in the past year. Is that right, Rachel? Late 2016, there was a rule that got changed, and that's true for all the water utilities. That can affect where your connection points are. If you're thinking that you can get the clearances and you can get over top of it with one of those gravity utilities because that water line's deep enough, you may not be able to. You may have to go the other direction, or you may have to find another connection point. Rachel?
I will say there's an exception process through the state.
Yep.
If we can demonstrate that it's not feasible, but it's time consuming. So to your point, planning ahead and it is a little bit of a change to the design, just assuming you can snake the water wherever and get the gravity facilities figured out.
Right. If those of you in the room that haven't met Rachel Murphy is the Director of Engineering for Contra Costa Water District. Thanks, Rachel. So getting in with utilities early is a big deal. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
We had experience when we were doing a project and we had
Hold on,
offsite.
hold on. I just want to get the mic. I'll make sure
Oh.
the question is on the record.
We had offsite conditions and we shared a cost for some light standards with the city.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was on the engineering drawings and all that. And so we knew what the budget was. But as we got into it, the USA, I mean, you couldn't put the light standard there.
Right.
So then all of a sudden we're moving to another spot. And then that wasn't good. And we're moving to another spot. And the costs seemed to all went to us because we had a shared agreement. And the city said, well, no, this is our maximum cost. And it seemed, just looking at it, was unfair. And no one could figure out how you could have taken care of that beforehand, because as you do urban development, I mean, those streets are full of stuff and you can't figure it out what to do until you actually open it up. And so I don't know how to resolve that, but it's certainly something that we experience, and it certainly affected our bottom line.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it. It is a challenge dealing with the utilities, and it's a challenge. You'll often hear us say, hey, have you potholed any of these spots where you have potential crossings or potential things going in? We'll ask you to pothole early in the process, not necessarily an entitlement process, but as you start your permitting process, we're going to ask you if you potholed for the design. Because sometimes you need to get some better fidelity on where some of this stuff is. And so calling USA to get some of that information for potholing has saved a couple of projects. On the Newell Village project down here at Main Street and Newell, if you remember, there was a 7-story building in there and there was a 7-Eleven. They came in and they put 2 levels of underground. It's got units above and ground floor retail. As they went through the digging process for that and putting the shoring in, they were like, we're just digging and putting the shoring in. we don't want to have to go through all this utility stuff. But staff knew that there was a lot of utilities down the Main Street frontage, a lot of utilities. And we knew that a lot of those utilities, dry utilities, had been bored. And we weren't quite sure where they were. They hadn't really potholed for them, and we really insisted they potholed. We also knew that some of those facilities were really expensive if you hit them, like fiber optic. So the plan had them, drilling out for the tiebacks for the shoring system, and it went out into the right-of-way, which is okay for temporary basis. But one of the things that, had they not potholed, they would have hit that fiber optic line not once, not twice, but 3 times. And at $1 million a pop, it was well worth the extra $100,000 to get all the potholing done. And they spent it, but it drove their project to the right in time, a good 2 months doing that. And so, yeah. So sometimes it comes out okay, and we get it. It can get expensive. Okay, this I think is something that we wanted to highlight, in that they use the architecture. This is just a small little nook here to kind of tuck the electric and the gas meter for this new building back in. They just pushed it back enough, and then they put these cages on it. This is a good way of, this is one of the things I talk about where, with utilizing the architecture to tuck these pieces in. And then the other piece with the gas meters over there on the building that's adjacent to it. Obviously, we don't want to see this. This is a building that really hasn't had much to it. It just got tenanted after tenanted, and as they got these gas meters hanging, and I just wonder how these things avoid from getting hit when the truck driver comes to pick this guy up. And this is sitting right out in the street. This is a problem that we hate, but there's not a lot you can do about it. We try to get them inside if we can. Sometimes they have to go outside, but they don't look very nice. This is a backflow preventer for the inside water system. Restaurants typically have to have this on their fountain systems, and it's a nice way of covering up a little backflow preventer, but it's just a green bag sitting out in front of your building. It doesn't look very good. It's probably in the right of way. We probably said, you got no other choice, we're going to let you do it, but really, shouldn't be there. And when I see this one, I go, hey, this is a true example, I think, of an afterthought. Whoever designed the building or MEP did not realize tell anybody how big that manifold was going to be for the gas. And so as they got to building it, whoever came along said, oh, we should probably put these little pots here to kind of hide it, because otherwise people are going to smack themselves on this meter and the associated piping, right? So it probably was just shown on the plans as this is where the gas connection is, just a note, and not really how big it is. So that's just something that we see and we go, yeah, that could have probably been done a little bit better. Maybe that piece could have been tucked in. Maybe there could have been a different configuration that was talked about earlier in the process. All right. Ramps, I'm going to skip a little quicker through this, but when you're doing ramps, you need more survey than lots of times you get. So if you get survey early, if you don't get enough of it to do your ramp design, you're going to have to go back in permitting to get some more. The ALTAs usually pick up a lot more survey data than just calling somebody up and getting a planning level survey. But at the same time, you got to communicate how much detail you need so you can get through there and know where the property lines are, because it can matter whether or not how those ramps play in, whether they're in the public right of way or not. Details, we're going to want to see details when you get into permits. And we're going to want to see the civil and the architect site plans match, and we're also going to want to see that the civil and the landscape architect's plans match. Sometimes we see one but not the other. Sometimes we see the architect and the landscape architect match and the civil's 90 degrees off to the right. And so we work through the permitting phase to get that lined up. The better job you can do with that, the better. This, I think, is just, it's too steep. There's no landing. to the front door. Not sure where this is or what it's for, but this is something that you don't want to do. And in a lot of cases you can't do, but this exists. These pictures were all taken over the past couple weeks by staff, just around the downtown. This is a project I worked on. This is an example that Scott Wickstrom used in his ramps thing with the East Bay engineers. So you see that? That's a tripping hazard. I remember having a conversation with the designer and the site owner over this. They were fine with it. It's okay, except for it's a tripping hazard. They should have just flared them on both sides. This is silly. I remember this one too. See all that? So there's the sidewalk up there where that lady is. And if you want to come across that ramp, you've got to navigate that. And it's just because they couldn't make the grade up from one place to the other, and there was already some concrete, and they needed a landing, and so on and so forth. Stuff we want to avoid. The yellow is because this piece of the ramp is installed correctly. At least they have something. But that curb right there is a pain in the neck, and I think it's outside the right of way. We kind of went, it's not a good idea. Okay. Basins. This is a C3 basin stuff, and like I said, we can get, there's days that are spent on just talking about all the details on C3 basins. I'll tell you that one of the things that we really look at is, do you have the right size? Did you allow enough room for it and give yourself enough room to make mistakes or to have stuff move around or encroach into it? You're going to see a little of those pictures. And keep them out of the right of way, and then keep them out of easements. So a lot of times we'll see where some of these things get planned in and they got to go where they got to go because it's the gravity fed. But nobody plotted the easements or got all the easements out of the title report, plotted them on the map, and now they got to get moved because they're in Central Sands right away or easement or in one of the water districts or PG&Es or something, and they don't want it there. Okay. Here's I don't know where this basin is, but it's really deep. That's probably about 20 feet to there. We don't want to see those either, right? For these C3 basins, we're not looking for you to create really big, deep things, but we need to detail these things out so that they're specific to what you're trying to do. And the detailing is more than what's just sitting in the guidebook. It's being specific about the grades that are around it and what you're trying to do and what it's interfaced with and what's right next to it. And check the dimensions. We can see, you don't want to spend an entire time to QA your drawings either, right? You want to get through plan check fairly efficiently. I don't have enough time to completely QA your drawings, and when I do, I'm going to find stuff, but you should do that too. Yep, this is one of mine. Looked good on the drawings, looked okay, didn't look like it was going to be that big of a deal until the contractor said, hey, I'm only going to give you 18 inches of the soil in the top. So in a C3 basin, you've got the bottom, you've got a 12-inch rock section, drainage layer, and then you've got 18 inches of this sandy loam percolated soil, and that's a minimum. And then you've got plants and whatever. Well, in this corner right here, they could have put a lot more of that soil in there. But to make the basins, we also want the basins flat. So when you flatten them out, somewhere along in there, they've only got about 6 inches of ponding, and it matches. But when you get up into that corner, because that parking lot does this, all of a sudden now I got a 2-foot drop, or almost a 2-foot drop right here. Now it's not enough to require a handrail. And so if you look in this picture really close, there's a sign that's stuck into the wall right here. And that's to give the drivers a visual cue to not cut that corner, because there's been a couple of cars and trucks that have driven over that curb and found their axles in that basin. And it's just, and if you're in this parking spot and you're a passenger and you go to get out, you got no place to go, right? Can you see the C3 basins in this one? They're actually done really well. You can hardly tell that they're there, but they're there. I've got a little thing right there where they cross underneath. But one of the things that they forgot was that this transformer requires access all the way around it. When they came in for the design, the basin went behind it, and it was included in their area. And if you've done any of this design, you know that you're fighting for every square foot of space, and you have so much you have to do that that this caused a little bit of an issue of trying to figure out whether or not the basins were still going to work for the drainage calculations. So just because they missed the requirement, and PG&E goes, you're going to give us space all the way around it. Go figure out how you're going to make your drainage work. And this was late in the process. What about this one? So this is good in that these are sitting on the edge. They're not in the basin itself. They're accessible, and they're not off. They don't impact the sidewalk. This one's funny. The owner of this project is doing it by himself. He's a registered engineer, works for the state. Oops. I'll just tell you the two things. This is something sitting over top of the inlet, and we don't want any of that to happen. But you see this undermines the sidewalk. He didn't catch the grades correctly. And so the way that they got undermined in the sidewalk. We see this all the time with basins right next to the sidewalk or next to a building, and you didn't think about how deep the footing was. So adjacency is an issue with these. We get complaints about these all the time. If you've been out there, you know where this is. These are deep because they had to do hydromodification, and that requires some extra depth in the top. They look nice to some people. I've gotten some compliments on them as well. Not on my project that I designed. It was consultant designed. They function, except for, this guy right here blocks, that guy there blocks, but you know why they put those in there? Because see how the striping's lined up? And if I pull in the spot, I could drive right through there if I pulled forward. If I put in the wrong gear or I rolled forward, my car would end up in that basin, and that's happened to a few people. All right, parking and loading. Now I'm almost done. This is the last one. Demonstrating on the plans where the parking and loading occurs. Use real dimensions. It's kind of a pain in the butt to kind of go through the process and then find out that you don't really have the room that you thought you did. And identify required versus provided, and adequately pay attention to the ADA stalls. I put this up in the slideshow because I want to make sure it gets out there. It seems like not a lot of folks have access to this. We get asked for it a lot. It's the off-street parking standards, and right there at the bottom is a reference to where it is in the Muni Code. These requirements come up in Title 10 in the zoning regulations. That's where a lot of these parking requirements come, to include dimensions. Okay. Something else I want to highlight here. I was asked what's really wrong with this. Why is this red? Just similar to the other example. People come around the corner there and they drive in. You see these things allow water into that basin, but people drive into those things all the time. They cut that corner too short on that right-hand side of your car. If you cut that corner too much, you're into that curb. And if your wheel catches inside that opening, you're in that basin before you know it. So it's the adjacency. If that basin was stepped back from that curb and it didn't require, and oh, by the way, these are expensive because those curbs are all retaining walls. Those things are all retaining walls that are 3.5 feet tall. Those are expensive. So if you just step them back, gave yourself some room, they could just be curbs, which are a lot cheaper, and you don't have the issue of having cars drive into them, not being able to get them back out again. But every one of those curbs are that. So this is down Commercial Lane, popular restaurant area, and this is what happens most of the day. Can't do much about it. It's Commercial Lane is good for that, at least. But you can see that there are two people trying to make deliveries. This happens all day long, every day. Figuring out how you're going to load your job, how you're going to operate it, the deliveries that happen when you have commercial associated with your project is something that really has to get looked at and discussed. It's a pain for everybody. And I mean, do we want to have all these businesses in here? Absolutely. Are these great restaurants? I love this place. And I'm glad they're here. But boy, I'm glad I'm not the manager to operate all of that and to deal with the complaints and the getting everybody in and out of there, right? So as we go look at design features, as we look at trying to do a better job of pulling projects together, these are the kinds of things that we think about, we're going to bring up, and we want you to see early so we can discuss what those impacts really are. Okay, some final thoughts, and this is kind of what I really want you to remember. Leave yourself some wiggle room. When you're on a project and you're going through the entitlement phase, leave yourself some room for all this stuff to occur. It's really important that you give everybody, as they go through and tighten up the process, some room to make adjustments, and the contractor to make some room when things don't exactly fit or get exactly built, because their tolerance for building stuff isn't a Swiss watch. They're digging stuff with a tractor. Okay? So if you can't get it accurate to somebody driving a tractor, then it's too tight. So give everybody some room. And then, think about some of these things earlier in the process. It'll really help. It'll help make everything go smoother. Okay, I've talked a lot. So, anybody got any questions? Yes?
I just have one quick comment.
Ethan's going to run a microphone over to you.
So, thank you for a great presentation. I mean, these are things that we think about a lot because of our experiences. Trash enclosure, trash pickup is a huge one that I've experienced, and the fire department connection stuff is a big headache as well.
Yep.
I find, particularly on the fire department connection, that we use a design build contractor to prepare those drawings. That guy's not on board any time until late in the process. And so part of the reason why we always have this is those files just aren't available. And we're working, I think, better to try to guess where those things will go to try and help that process. But it's an inherent problem in the way we, as an industry, do our design. All the things that you said are helpful, and look forward to having a copy of your presentation to show to others in my firm. The one thing that I have found to plan early, parking is always something that we spend a lot of time planning early, and I've really found that mail and deliveries has now become a really big thing for us. The post office doesn't always communicate with the city or any of the other agencies well. They have their own requirements. Fitting in mailboxes is often a challenge and an afterthought.
Yep.
And particularly now, because the world has changed a little bit, it's not so much mail, it's package delivery. And particularly in downtown Walnut Creek, as folks are doing more higher density, having delivery rooms where folks can deliver packages that aren't just for the post office, I think is something folks are going to start thinking about. We even had somebody give a presentation about having drone delivery boxes on the roof, telling us that actually no one's going to deliver packages by hand anymore, and that's something we needed to start thinking about. I'm not quite ready to think about that yet, but just throwing it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else got any comments or questions? Well, thanks for coming today, and thanks for listening to me drone on about all these little nitnoid pain in the neck details. I appreciate it. Not all of this stuff drives me nuts, but it drives staff nuts collectively. And I look forward to working with everybody to get some of these things incorporated into future designs and plans to make this process smoother for everybody. So thanks.
Good job.
Thank you.
So we ran over a couple of minutes. Thank you all for your patience and flexibility. As I mentioned, PG&E will be here next month. We'll also be talking about some sustainability measures we're running through here at the city. We'll have some guests from the city here to speak as well. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next month.